This is Newsfeed, a look at some of today's biggest stories and how people are responding online to them. World leaders or their representatives have flocked to New York for the UN General Assembly this week. They're there to discuss the various crises facing the world today. The top three: the climate crisis, the energy crisis, and the war in Ukraine. Well, that country's president, Volodymyr Zelensky, however, is absent for obvious reasons. He's sending a pre-recorded message. The Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, kicked off the first day of meetings with a State of the World speech.
Excellencies, we need action across the board. Let's have no illusions. We are in rough seas. A winter of global discontent is on the horizon. A cost of living crisis is raging, trust is crumbling, inequalities are exploding, and our planet is burning. People are hurting, with the most vulnerable suffering the most. Excellencies, there is another battle we must end: our suicidal war against nature. The climate crisis is the defining issue of our time, and it must be the first priority of every government and multilateral organization. And yet, action is being put on the back burner, despite overwhelming public support around the world.
And the Turkish President, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, is also there. And as usual, he addressed the Assembly on the first day of the high-level debate.
The world is moving further away from the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals that aim to erase poverty. The only way to enlighten this dark picture that the humanity is facing is through international solidarity and cooperation based on fairness and justice.
World leaders aren't the only speakers. Celebrities also have a lot to say.
Hi, this is Blackpink.
The Korean pop band Blackpink talks about how urgent it is to address issues like global poverty, education, and clean energy. And this poem from American poet Amanda Gorman went viral online.
I challenge you to heed this call. I dare you to shape our fate. Above all, I dare you to do good so that the world might be great.
The social media is closely watching what's being said in New York about climate change. This UN expert on the topic explains what to listen out for.
Number one, how world leaders talk about energy. The crisis in Ukraine, this devastating war, has caused energy prices to skyrocket all around the world. People are really suffering. But how world leaders tackle this is going to really tell whether we can usher in a clean energy revolution or we're going to lock in fossil fuels for decades to come. Number two, will countries step up to help each other and vulnerable communities around the world? Recently, the UN Secretary General went to Pakistan to witness some of the devastating floods that are happening there. He called this complete inadequacy to tackle climate change impacts like the one in Pakistan an injustice and a betrayal. Will world leaders step up? Number three, all references to COP27. COP stands for the Conference of the Parties. These are the negotiations around the Paris Agreement that are scheduled to happen later this year in Egypt. Now, at the General Assembly, world leaders often indicate their willingness to find areas of compromise or not, and the tone set at the General Assembly will completely impact what happens at those talks later in the year.
Next, a man who was convicted of murdering his girlfriend in 1999 and spent the last 23 years in prison has been freed. U.S. Judge Melissa Finn on Monday overturned Adnan Syed's 30-year conviction, saying the ruling was in the, quote, interest of justice and fairness. She added that Maryland lawyers failed to share evidence that could have helped Syed's defense. The Baltimore City State Attorney's Office released a statement saying the now 41-year-old Syed deserves a new trial. That's as police have identified 2 new suspects. Meanwhile, videos of Syed leaving the courthouse, smiling and waving, quickly went viral, with supporters cheering and welcoming the ruling. He's now in home detention with GPS location monitoring as he awaits the new trial date or the case's dismissal.
Those are dumplings we got yesterday. They're pretty good.
And this video of Syed checking leftovers in the fridge and enjoying some dumplings has also been shared on social media. But how and why did the case garner so much attention? Here's some background on the story. Well, Syed's case was brought to light after 15 years thanks to Rabia Chowdhury. She's Syed's childhood friend, but she's also an attorney, author and activist. And after spending years trying to get her friend out of prison, she celebrated with posts on social media. While others online, like law professor Khaled Beydoun, decided to draw attention to the American justice system for jailing a man who many believe is innocent. Beydoun says Syed might be free now, but he's lost 23 years of his life. On the other hand, some like writer Portia Antonio Alexis have voiced an unpopular opinion, saying that while everyone has the right to a fair trial and that the overturning is valid, Syed is not innocent. Meanwhile, the official account of the Serial podcast is following the case and gives regular updates to its followers.
But what's different about this case concerning Adnan Syed is that it was the subject of a podcast, and one that went viral, you may recall, in 2014. It was called Serial. It examined this case in great depth and it brought it great international attention. Now, there were legal reasons why Syed is out. He may yet face another trial. He could also just be declared innocent and be a free man. But there's no denying that this, which is one of many cases of people in the United States and elsewhere claiming that they've been jailed for the wrong reasons, has come to public attention and the attention of the legal authorities, primarily because of publicity and because of a podcast called Serial.
I mean, it seemed like every television news network was covering the Queen's funeral on Monday, right? Well, more than 4.1 billion people are estimated to have watched it. That's more than the Apollo moon landing in 1969 and more than Princess Diana's funeral in 1997. The Queen's funeral was the most watched broadcast in history. Needless to say, the story made the front page of many newspapers around the world, with some producing special souvenir editions. The UK's Daily Mirror had the words, "Until we meet again," on its cover page. That's a phrase the Queen used during an address she made during COVID-19 lockdown. The Guardian showed the same picture of the pallbearers with the heading, "The Final Farewell." The Sun's front and back pages showed the Queen's cortege approaching Windsor Castle, and on the back page, "God Save the King." In India, many of the newspapers also led with the Queen, "World bids farewell to the Queen." In the World newspaper, the Times of India had a picture in the cover of its front page, "Britain bids tearful farewell." And down under, the Aussie Press also paid their respects. The Daily Telegraph said, "Rest in peace, ma'am." The Australian showed a miserable-looking King Charles with the banner, "Farewell, Elizabeth the Great." And the Sydney Morning Herald also used the words, "We'll meet again." To another big story we've been following online, the floods and humanitarian disaster in Pakistan. Development Minister Ahsan Iqbal posted a video on his social media account showing areas in Balochistan and Sindh provinces that are still underwater. You can see in some parts in this video how the roofs are the only evidence that someone's home is still there. Iqbal begged that support be given to those who've lost everything. But some people aren't too happy with how the government's been handling the crisis. Shafi here is accusing the country's leaders of serving their own interests, adding that had residents been a priority for the administration, the floods would not have had this much of an impact. And this Twitter user is suggesting international aid has not been reaching the people who need it. Meanwhile, a local aid organization, Kubaib Foundation Pakistan, says it's distributed food, mosquito nets, tents and cash directly to people in Sindh province.
बच्चों के लिए ले जा रहे हैं कुछ नहीं था सर
So an estimated 700,000 cows have drowned in Pakistan during the monsoon season. Farmers are saying it's been a struggle feeding the ones that have survived. Huge swathes of agricultural land have been submerged for weeks now. And although the season was supposed to end early in September, the rains haven't really stopped. More is even expected in the coming days.
The grass has become rotten. It's turned black. I can't feed the cows with this. The animals will remain hungry and eventually die.
A journalist in East Ukraine on her social media describes seeing chunks of human flesh littered on the street, and that's just after Ukraine dropped bombs in the area on Monday. She uploaded this video with an effect to make the images less jarring. She said she saw a hand and a foot on the ground and mangled bodies everywhere. The Russia-aligned Donetsk mayor, Alexei Kulimzin, says 13 civilians, including 2 children, were killed when Ukrainian forces shelled the Kubishevsky district.
We just held a cabinet meeting, and as you pointed out, we have decided to use about $1.83 million from our reserve funds to spend on necessary costs to hold Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's state funeral.
So what you just heard there ignited this. A protest against how much the Japanese government says it's going to spend for the state funeral of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. In fact, the cost is believed to be more than the $1.8 million the finance minister announced. According to the latest estimates, the funeral is likely to cost somewhere around $12 million. This includes security detail, reception costs, and hosting foreign delegations. The funeral will be held on September 27th, and around 6,000 guests are expected. The guest list includes the likes of former US President Barack Obama, the current Vice President Kamala Harris, and France's President Emmanuel Macron. Well, opinion polls show the majority of taxpayers are not thrilled about the massive bill, especially after revelations about Abe's ties to the Unification Church. This tweet points out that even people in the recently typhoon-hit Tokyo have spoken up against the cost. Some 13,000 people protested despite heavy rain. The demonstrations weren't just about the funeral, though. There were also anti-war and anti-nuclear sentiments.
I'm a 19-year-old musician and robot.
So what is it?
That was Michaela. She's got millions of followers on social media. But get this, she's not a real person. She's a robot. And more and more companies are hiring artificial intelligence personalities to promote their products. And there are obvious advantages. I mean, robots can work around the clock, they don't ask for money, and as you can see, very realistic. Well, script writers and software engineers come together and configure Michaela and her friends to do and say what the brands want, and everyone's happy. Well, except maybe the robots? Oh, I don't know.
A robot influencer created by a startup called Bread.
I'm a 19-year-old musician and robot.
So what is a robot influencer? Well, Lil Michaela has a team of Bread creatives scripting and producing every post, video, song, and even episode of her Snap show Get Real with Michaela. However, it doesn't stop there. Little Michaela secures the bag for Bread by doing brand deals, like this one with Samsung.
Well, at the moment, it's mostly tech and fashion industry giants that use robot influencers. They engage followers and ask questions like, are you human? Or will you one day take over the world? I mean, to mimic real people, they also share snapshots of their so-called lives. So weird, right? And it seems like it works on some people. A conversation with a robot influencer can feel mind-blowingly real. And as their labor cheap, their popularity seems to be rapidly growing. Brands don't need to worry about budgeting huge sums of money for advertising. And that's why the virtual influencer industry in China is worth $16 billion. Also, the fact that they're digitally flawless and never age is another selling point. But on that note, some are concerned it's like comparing themselves to a Barbie doll. Teenagers might look up to the beauty standards of robots. And that's how we wrap Newsfeed today. You can find us on YouTube. See you next time.